Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this session on understanding systemic risk in the age of polycrisis. My name is Manal Bernoussi. I'm an international MC and moderator from Morocco, and it is an absolute pleasure to be with you here today. Welcome to all of you who joined us here in Geneva. Thank you for being in the room. It is wonderful to see a full room today for this session. For all of you who are joining us online, thank you as well for tuning in. So, as you can see, this is an interesting setting. It is called a fishbowl discussion setting. We have the active speakers who are in the inner circle, and then we'll be looking to take as many insights and questions from the other circles as well. So before we dive in, a few practical notes to ensure everyone has the best experience. Again, we want to make sure that you all feel comfortable to share your insights, to share your expertise. And so let us go through some housekeeping items. So for our virtual audience, if you would like to follow the session in one of the 6 UN languages, you can do so via the interactive program page. On the questions, we will be taking questions from the room. There will be handheld mics for you, and we will also be using Slido for our online audience. So simply connect on slido.com using the code on screen or scan the QR code. For those sharing insights online, if there is any insight, something that caught your attention, a powerful quote, a call to action, please feel free to share that using the hashtag #ActForResilienceToday and hashtag #EveryDayCounts. This will allow us to keep the conversation going forward beyond these walls. All right, now let's set the stage for today's discussion. The Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, the GAR Special Report 2024, which was launched ahead of the Summit of the Future, reminds us that disasters are never isolated. One event can ripple across physical, socioeconomic, and institutional systems, exposing hidden connections and vulnerabilities. Now, to truly advance resilience, we must move beyond simply managing the impacts of disasters. We need to examine the root causes, the structural and socioeconomic factors that allow risks to build up and silently over time. And we must understand how these vulnerabilities also interact and amplify, especially under the growing pressures of climate change. This broader, more holistic approach calls on us to, first, number one, strengthen the links between disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. Number two, identify mutually beneficial opportunities across policies and programs. And number three, build the capacity of governments and institutions to plan across sectors and levels. At the same time, we must identify and scale up the resilience factors that have already proven effective so that we are not just reacting, but building systems that can withstand the shocks of the future. This session invites us all, governments, practitioners, and youth, to take stock of where we are at today and to explore the new capabilities, partnerships, and financing models we need to thrive in this era of polycrisis. Now, to take this conversation forward, I am honored to introduce an outstanding panel of experts and practitioners from around the world. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Brendan Moon, Coordinator General, National Emergency Management Authority, Australia. Mr. Carlos Picado, online. He's joining us virtually. He's member of the National Commission for Risk Prevention and Emergency Response, Costa Rica. Brigadier Ahmed Bourqiba, Director, Dubai Global Resilience Center, United Arab Emirates. Welcome to you, sir. Mrs. Sripana Sil, co-founder, GRRID, Corps India. She is joining us virtually as well. Mrs. Ruth Richardson, Executive Director, Accelerator for Systemic Risk Assessment. Welcome to you. Mrs. Catherine Sotomayor, Regional Focal Point, Major Group for Children and Youth, Mexico. Welcome. Dr. Mariana Budimir, Senior Climate and Resilience Expert, Practical Action, United Kingdom. Welcome. And Mr. Jeff Schlegel-Milch, Director, National Center for Disaster Preparedness, Columbia University, United States. Welcome to you, sir. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation and for sharing your expertise. That being said, we intend to this session to be a dialogue, not only among our participants and panelists, but also from all of you in the room. So let's dive in and start by setting the scene. So as we gather past the halfway mark to 2030, the headlines of the past few years, the pandemic, the climate extremes, the economic shocks, the geopolitical tensions remind us that risks no longer come one at a time, and they are wired together through longer and critical systems that sustain our lives. So our purpose today is to look past isolated hazards and focus on those underlying connections. And our overall guiding question today is, how can improving our understanding of systemic risks reveal more about the necessary capabilities and capacities we must develop among local, national, regional, and international stakeholders. So each speaker will have about 5 minutes to share their core message, insights, followed by an exchange with the audience. Now, Mr. Brendan Moon, let's begin with you. In your view, which single capability, data, governance, or financing must we strengthen first to break silos and manage cascading risks nationwide?
Thank you, Manar, and that is an interesting question, because we would have a view driven very much by our most recent experience from 2019. We've had a marked uptick in terms of the frequency and the intensity of natural hazard events that have impacted not only our part of the world, but if I look around this room, many of the nations that are represented here today. On top of that, we've been impacted by COVID, we've had supply chain issues, cyber intrusions, and we also have ongoing geopolitical stresses as well that really challenge us and our institutions in how we manage risk and how we manage crises. And we would have a firm view on our experiences that governance is essential into the future in terms of making the global systems and our communities much more resilient. But it needs to be informed by good data and targeted, timely investment. The combination of all those crises that I mentioned earlier really has triggered our part of the world to think differently about how we actually deal with crises and what are in our toolbox actually to manage those crises. And we need to take a different approach. And what I'd like to do is really touch on 2 examples of how we operationalise that at a local level. But in designing systems and in designing governance approaches, we need to recognise, all of us, that we have many diverse communities and sectors that we are dealing with. In Australia, diverse communities, island, coastal, remote, rural, metropolitan communities, and designing a system that actually keeps them safe and ensures they're resilient is extraordinarily important. But we also recognise that future growth in high-risk areas, relying on complex interconnected power, telecommunications, health, infrastructure and supply chains, potentially makes those communities more vulnerable into the future. So that's what's driven our particular approach to managing crises and also to building governance systems that are inclusive, are responsive, and capture all the interests covered by these particular crises. As I said, there are a series of nationally significant natural disasters and also other challenges as well. We quickly learnt the traditional method in the emergency management sector was limited. It took a top-down approach, almost a siloed approach to how we managed the impacts. And what we are now looking at is much more managing the consequences of those challenges. But to do that requires a different approach. It requires a multi-sectoral approach so that we get insights from all sectors as to what the challenges are what the solutions are, and who's actually responsible for delivering on those, so we limit the impact of those consequences. So we established the National Coordination Mechanism, which is a step change in how Australia manages complex crises involving multiple stakeholders. It operates by embracing the capabilities of governments, the private sector, the public sector, not-for-profits and the community. And it brings together all players, usually in an online environment, and depending on the type of crisis, we've had up to 500 people online dealing with a particular crisis and the impact in their multiple sectors. And really it operates by actually defining what the impacts are in each sector, who's responsible for minimising those impacts, and then what the plan is to deal with those and how that is then communicated to government and importantly to the community as well. And it's been remarkably effective not only during natural disasters but also during the course of supply chain challenges, cyber intrusions, and it's a system that we continue to evolve to ensure that we do have that multi-sectoral approach and we do have lines of effort, that we clearly identify responsibilities and the capabilities necessary to deal with that. So it's a different paradigm and it's a different approach to managing crises that's inclusive, doesn't take a top-down approach, and is actually distributed across the entire community sector. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moon, for sharing those examples with us. And that's really a compelling reminder of the foundational role of governance that can play. Mr. Carlos Picado, turning to you now, connecting online. How can sovereign risk financing tools be redesigned to capture invisible knock-on effects and indirect losses that emerge weeks or months after a disaster?
Bien, buenos días a todos. Disculpen que no hable inglés.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry because I don't speak English, but I'm well speaking Spanish. So the question is a complex question because when we talk about managing the sovereign risk, this is related to the capacity of the government to honor all their commitments or any related to future expenses and expending of governments. I'm going to refer to an important concept of being able or being capable of capture data related to losses, mainly because when we talk about losses, we are talking about a financial concept. We need to determine the effect and impact of disasters from a monetary point of view. And this leads us to trying to determine the cost or replenishment that is implied in disasters when occurring. And this it's a pressure for the economy of a country when many of the countries are going to have certain limitations when we talk about financing tools. One of the important concepts to take into account are those tools related to recovery. Within the possibility of resigning tools, an key element is to have knowledge to be able to interpret and recognize future losses that we are going to suffer. And all important efforts we need to make include doing an exercise called risk assessment. But this risk assessment is the assessment of risk as to the determination of future loss to be able how much I'm going to spend and to distribute those financial instruments and to be able to know what's the burden of disasters on the economy. But the common denominator of the Sendai framework tells us that this burden is not just limited to how much I need to invest to recover, but also how much I need to invest to prevent future disasters. And this has an additional issue. We need to consider that we need not only identify losses, but also the invisible or side effects and indirect losses. This is very important in our this should be very important in our analysis, because today the effort is not just to determine the direct impact of a disaster, which is basically a value of all the damaged assets or infrastructure, but also we need to determine which is going to be the impact on the economy. And so, which is later impact, where we don't just need to recover the infrastructure that was lost on the production that we couldn't exercise, but also we need to measure what's the impact of this disaster on the economic activity of the country. And so it's not just that we need to finance the recovery, but we need to take into account this economic impact. And what I would like to tell you is that the effort in redesigning finance instruments means that we need to do a risk assessment, and the challenge of the UN Risk Reduction Office especially is to be able to do this risk analysis in terms of the direct indirect effect. And this is what we've been discussing since, I think, GAR 2019, when we are already talking about having the possibility of doing a systemic analysis and take into account which are the systemic impacts that those disasters may have. This will lead us to have a right measurement and precise measurement of the effect, of the degree of effect of a disaster, and then try to redistribute these costs with finance tools that can be scalable, ranging from minor events to major events, in order to serve those events. Of course, we need to take into account, additionally, all the investment we need to do in critical sectors. For example, public utilities or public service infrastructure to guarantee recovery or reduce the vulnerability of such infrastructure, so that the impact of disasters is not so big. And to wrap up, what I would like to say is that it is more relevant not the identification of the threat um, factors, but also the vulnerability aspects of our economies. Thank you very much.
Mr. Carlos Picado. You've emphasized how the real costs of the disasters extend far beyond the actual headlines, urging us to think how risk financing can truly support recovery and resilience, and also your point on managing and measuring the impact is also essential. Brigadier Ahmed Bourqiba, with Dubai's extensive experience conducting over 150 interagency drills, what practice stands out as the most transferable for anticipating urban system failure during a polycrisis?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry, I will speak in the Arabic language, and sorry for that for everybody.
Please raise your hand if you need a headset. Kindly let us know if you have any technical issue, and someone from the team will be happy to assist you. Tech team, if someone can assist with the headsets, thank you so much. And can we also check the interpretation in Arabic, as I'm being told that it is not active? Thank you. So maybe I will move on to the next question and come back to you, making sure that all those who have their hands up have their headsets available, so it will allow us also to check live interpretation, simultaneous interpretation in Arabic. I'll come back to you, Brigadier. So to Mrs. Sripana Sil, who is joining us virtually. Mrs. Sil, let's hear your perspective. Which indigenous insight have you seen reveal a previously hidden vulnerability, and how was that insight transformed into policy or investment?
I would like to thank for giving me this opportunity to share insights from my work. So, am I audible?
Mrs. Sil, now we can see you and hear you perfectly. Over to you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to share insights from our work. So when we talk about systemic risk, it is a silent predator lurking within our systems, unnoticed, unleashed. It unleashes chaos across sectors and borders. In our interconnected world, where crisis ripples in seconds, understanding this duality isn't academic, but it's survival. First, risk embeds himself invisibly, so deep that it's ignored. And then it explodes, cascading across time and space. This matters. Risk grows quietly and then strikes with force. Decoding systemic risk isn't simple. Indigenous insights offer depth, but the puzzle demands nuance and persistence. If it were easy, then we'd be already resilient by now, which we're not, but we are trying. So let's learn and take example of a city from India whose journey from resilience to fragility. Almost 500 years ago, an Indian city along Thar Desert thrived on indigenous wisdom, a watershed system, harvested rainwater, a climate adaptive homes beat the heat. But modernization bought piped water, sidelining tradition. The neglected watershed raised groundwater, triggering urban waterlogging. Vernacular building gave way to quick constructions, worsening the urban heat island effect. And now, today, the blue color of these houses are praised for its quality to maintain a cool indoor temperature. But the construction style and the method are not given that much of an importance. A proof of how biases and perceptions sustain risk. This is risk born of inaction and short-sighted choices, and hence ignored as if absent. The insights have been integrated into development plan through the heat action plan, and the amendments to the city's development plan has been done, but the policies alone fail. Communities must own and drive change, otherwise resilience remains as a dream only. The second act of systemic risk is cascading chaos. A heat wave spikes electricity, demands and triggers load shedding and strains on health and tourism. But more subtle changes, like the push for air conditioners, deepen socio-economic divides and also social exclusion. And I would like to also mention this, that polycrisis isn't just global, it is local, robbing communities of land, identity, and often via climate change. We barely grasp these ripples, yet the stakes are immense. And so, to conclude, I would like to say that we may not fully decode risk creation or fallout, but indigenous insights blended with science can help in building policies to tackle hidden risks and their cascades. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sil. That's a powerful example of how indigenous knowledge can enrich policy and investment, helping us address risks that might otherwise go unnoticed. Back to you now, Brigadier. Hopefully everyone got their headsets. Please turn on your headsets to Arabic translation. Thank you.
يسعدني أن أشارك اليوم في
It is an honor for me to be with you today in this session with this elite of experts in this session. Of course, Dubai Emirates is distinguished as being developed and highly resilient. It's hosting more than 200 nationalities, and this requires complete preparedness for dealing with any risks or threats at the level of the Emirate. And of course, among those data, the strategy of risk management was very paramount at the Emirate. And at the level of Dubai government, we have built Dubai Center for Resilience at the end of 2024 for dealing with the emerging threats and risks. Now, cities are not taken into consideration for the buildings, but development of the systems. Nowadays, we should be prepared at all levels, whether for response or for recovery. And we can take the example for recovery. Today, we had many drills and many stakeholders would take part, different segments of society. We take into consideration languages, and there will be participation of government and private sectors. And if there is an impact on any system, that will impact the vital services and safety of the public. Therefore, we need to have a comprehensive ecosystem. That's why in Dubai, we took into consideration to have all sectors and even civil society, and the strategy in Dubai Emirates we follow, and as we are one of the cities that conducts a very high number of drills. In 2023, we did 22 drills, and in 2024, we did 14 strategic drills. Those drills, we don't take them as specific crises, but as mini crises. In one scenario, or one drill, we would measure the preparedness of electricity, infrastructure, transport, healthcare centers. For example, during COVID-19, we conducted a drill before the pandemic in 2019 and in coordination with the National Authority for Crisis and Disaster. So we did a drill, and people were thinking that, as usual, that there will be no pandemic. So all the possibilities, all scenarios were laid out and put on the table. We wanted to make sure the preparedness of the sectors. We cannot say that one entity can work in silo, because if there is any event, for example, about climate change, it's not only Environment Agency that will deal with it. No, it's all the agencies, because the transport sector will be impacted, airlines will be impacted, the port sector will be impacted, healthcare services will be impacted. How can we deliver medicines to people? Those are all challenges that we deal with on a daily basis in Dubai. And also during Expo 20, we were fully prepared. We have registers of risk for specific events, and we put on the table different scenarios, all possible scenario, and we conduct field drills. We have seen many countries have plans, but you don't experiment those risks. But when you do a field drill, you can measure the impact, and if there is any need for modification, this allows us to have a model city that will be ready to deal with any risks or challenges. So we conducted 14 drills, and we took some evaluators from abroad, from France. 14 drills during Expo. We had a team from France that they were measuring different activities, whether it's terrorist threats or attack by drones or impact on infrastructure. And when we had last year, when we had the flood that affected Dubai, all all the authorities were on the same page. That's why the speed of recovery was high, and maybe there were other countries that were impacted. And we had in one day more than 256 milliliters of rains. So the speed of recovery in 2 or 3 days, and then situation got back to normal, while other cities may take months to recover. That's why Dubai Emirates is efficient and is capable of dealing with any danger or risk. Thank you very much for your speech, Excellency Brigadier Ahmed Boukia.
Your insight on cross-agency drills, which really underscores the vital role for proactive collaboration in urban resilience in the face of complex crisis. Moving on to you, Mrs. Ruth Richardson, you've often spoken about honest hope, systemic risk assessments. How can this approach persuade senior decision makers to prioritize prevention over short-term political gains?
Thank you so much. I'm going to first just really quickly address the overarching question about capacities and capabilities, and then touch on honest hope. We published last September a report called Facing Global Risks with Honest Hope on the eve of the Summit of the Future. And in that, we identified the global capacities and capabilities that we need to address systemic risk. In the interest of time, let me just go through the list really quickly. First of all, we really need to understand systems and the multiple risks facing them. The practice of assessing risks to particular systems must change to encompass a more explicit understanding of the interconnections within and between systems. And by systems, I mean social systems, economic systems, political systems, even climate, health, food, energy systems. Secondly, we need to enhance collection of data and diverse sources of evidence. This has many facets. We need more consistent, enhanced data collection. We need new data sets, combinations and overlays of existing data sets to provide more granular, multi-objective data. We need data that is transparent, open source, and easily accessible by as many people as possible. And we need data that encompasses multiple sources of knowledge and ways of knowing, including from historically underrepresented groups such as Indigenous peoples, Global South, women, youth, and community leaders, as well as future generations. Number three, we need to mainstream new systemic risk frameworks and methodologies. We have some tools in hand, but not enough and not quickly enough. At the beginning of the conception of ASRA about 3 years ago, I did a listening tour with risk experts across the world. I asked them about the theory, the practice, and the field of systemic risk assessment. And invariably, without exception, the responses I got back were fragmented, siloed, biased, limited, lacking, patchy. Since then, I think a lot has moved, but we still need more and need to go further. On Saturday, ASRA will be hosting a global symposium on systemic risk in Paris, and we will be presenting a demo version of what is called STEER, S-T-E-E-R, which stands for Systemic Tool for Exploring and Evaluating Risk, in a closed beta with a full launch in October of 2025. This has two core functions. It helps users, number one, assess systemic risks, and number two, determine responses. And these work together to guide users from insight to action through a structured, evidence-based approach. Number four, we need to expand time horizons. We need to instill mechanisms for long-term thinking alongside systems to manage short-term crises. This means establishing institutional architecture at all governance levels that are focused on long-term policy and response planning, including, again, explicit consideration of future generations. Number five, very importantly, we need to put justice, multilateralism, and collective action at the center of systemic risk. There are many different risks to different communities and ecosystems from different sources at different points in time and in different regions. Such considerations place the issues of power, justice, and participation at the center of systemic risk. We often ask, risk to who, from what, when, and where? This is a powerful and profound question that we need to grapple with. Number six, we need to communicate effectively. People are less likely to respond to risk communication that does not speak to their everyday lives, their needs, and their values, and that has not been delivered by trusted or appropriate messengers. Number 7, finally, we need to direct funding and resources towards systemic risk. We need a radical, and I mean radical, increase in funding from philanthropic, public, private, and multilateral agencies to address interconnected societal and ecological risks with a significant reorientation away from single-issue policy and siloed projects. In terms of hope, let me just quickly say a word on hope. Our report was called Honest Hope, and for us that means that we need to be grounded in acknowledging the severity of our challenges while recognizing the immense possibility for innovation, change, and resilience. We've just completed a number of case studies that look at what a good systemic response looks like. It's called From Benches to Boardrooms. You can find it on our website. Let me just tell you a few of the insights from that, if I may. Number 1, no single institution, regardless of its resources or mandate, can address systemic risk in isolation. Number 2, while institutional leadership and buy-in is critical, transformative change often begins at the grassroots level, where communities experience risk within their local contexts. Number 3, the most effective responses don't just mitigate harm, they create ripple effects, unlocking multiple, sometimes unexpected, positive benefits. Our case studies demonstrate how addressing systemic risk can foster resilience, equity, and abundance, rather than simply preventing harms. And finally, no one waited for perfect conditions or the ideal moment. Instead, they worked with available resources and existing capacities, coupled with a strong vision of what could be, to find practical paths forward in imperfect conditions. If that's not hope, I don't know what is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you for sharing these insights that really show us how we can create the trust and momentum that is needed for real change. Mrs. Catherine Sotomayor, what would meaningful youth co-leadership look like in a national systemic risk task force facing deep uncertainty?
Thank you for your question, Manal. So before I answer your question, I also want to address the first overall question. As an anthropologist, I understand that multiple crises around us are not longer economical or when hazards came. They are also social. So it's not about the drought, it's about that it brings violence, gender violence to the houses. It's not about a storm, it's also that storm that leads displacement to the people who live near the river. So multiple crises means that we have to face the multiple problems at the same time, but also these social problems that sometimes we don't like to look because we think that are too personal for people that we cannot get in and make solutions for them. So that's an important thing. If we continue to responding one by one, then we will always be too late to respond to those crises. So understanding systemic risk means asking not why this hazard occurred or why this climate change that hit us all is always on the moving. No, we also need to ask us what social and economic conditions were already there that are affecting those people. And why haven't we done anything? Or why has the system failed? Or why we have never built something to solve those problems, to engage with those people. And at a local level, it also means to recognize these communities, not as only passive recipients of things from the government, but also as active holders of this knowledge and these networks that they built around them to solve these situations. So it's prevention, but it's prevention at all levels, right? We need to support their capacity to act. Yes, we do, but we also need to have that ability to listen and learn from what they already know and understand how they interact, what are the logics behind those solutions. And at a national level, this needs to break down the bureaucracy between institutions. When you ask youth people where they fear the most when they are facing institutionalized things that they have to do is bureaucracy. Like it took too many months or weeks or days to solve one thing, and across a system an ecosystem that is the same for them. So we need to build that institutional capacity to work across sectors, share that information, and that is also a long-term resilience in terms of systemic risk. So we have to shift from reactive to anticipatory, flexible, long-term investments in resilience. Now, when we start seeing this as systemic, truly systemic, then we can start financing these mechanisms and reinforce resilience across the multiple sectors that we have. And well, in this matter, as a youth, now we are already working with systemic lens. Youth leadership, they are connecting climate justice with extractivism, with food sovereignty, with mental health, with the gender-based violence. So we are not waiting for permission to look at these problems at a systemic level. We are doing it like that already. And we're going to the shores and clean the beaches before the storms came. We are changing our consumption habits in order to avoid these heat waves that are hitting us. So when we talk about this co-leadership in national systemic risk platforms, we have to go beyond inviting one young person to one panel. We have to be involved in defining the problem, in shaping the strategies, in going for the solutions. And that includes real decision making. You know, like access to resources, to this support. It also means ensuring youth participation, not limited to one type of profile, but including all of them. So if we want to avoid the next crisis becoming then another multiple crisis or polycrisis, we have to act in a systemic approach with bold decisions, with intergenerational partnerships. And because what is at stake is not how we respond to disasters, but how we choose to live and moving forward to them.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's so refreshing to see how meaningful youth inclusion can bring fresh energy and also perspective to this critical work. Thank you for your insights. Dr. Mirjana Budimir, a lot has been said. I'd love to have your perspective also on the overall question, and also to how can people-centered, multi-hazard early warning systems stay functional when compound crises disrupt both communications and supply chains?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity, and great points already raised by my fellow speakers. I might just kind of dig straight into what a multi-hazard early warning system is, so that we're all on the same page. So it's been mentioned quite a lot in the previous 2 days in the Early Warnings for All Multi-Stakeholder Forum. But multi-hazard early warning systems are systems that are designed to detect and provide timely, actionable warnings for multiple potential hazards, including those that may occur simultaneously, in sequence, or cumulatively over time. Their systems are aimed to reduce the impacts of hazard events by enabling timely preparedness and response actions. In terms of a people-centered multi-hazard early warning system, these are ones that are designed with and for people, so that the people have access to the right information, so that's relevant to all the risks that they face in the right way, so through coordinated and coherent and understandable information at the right time, so that they have enough lead time to act before, depending on the hazard type. And that also supports early action. That's our ultimate ambition. So we have clear, actionable, non-contradictory and achievable actions that are relevant to the multiple hazards and risks that people are facing. So in my opinion, and I'll be happy to be proven wrong, in the Global South, where we work across Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, these multi-hazard early warning systems do not really exist. They're not functional, they're not operational. There's gaps in existing single hazard early warning systems. There's progress in terms of trying to have multiple single hazard early warning systems that are running in parallel. But ultimately, often we're seeing that those responsible for early warning systems, particularly on the hazard side of things, are working in institutional silos. There are progress towards trying to connect the dots across the system in terms of communication, in terms of early action protocols and anticipatory action, but still a lot more is needed. And if we don't do this, we're at risk of not providing people with the relevant and real early warning information in terms of the risk they're actually facing on the ground. There are some aspects that we see where there's been progress across research, practice, and policy where we can build on those initiatives, and there's a lot of examples where progress is made, particularly in the global north, that we could be learning from, but the context is very different. In terms of research, the multi-hazard risk assessment and analysis community is really, really strong. So there's a huge amount that we can build on there in terms of identifying the hazards specific to the context and specific to the vulnerabilities that people face. And then also, we do need to move beyond, it's quite a natural hazard focused assessments within the early warning system community to thinking about other risks. So going beyond hydrometeorological risks, thinking about geological, thinking about health, thinking about food security, but really driven by what are the risks that people are facing. In terms of practice, I think, echoing some of the points before, we need to work on what we've got at the moment. Like, what are the good enough forecast information that we can build on? Do we need to focus on the qualitative, expert-driven forecasting? We can't wait for science and physical science to catch up. We can coordinate and improve the dissemination communication strategies and build in redundancies, which are good practice in any case for early warning systems, but also we need to think about avoiding conflicting information, advice, and actions. There are opportunities of building from localized community practices, expanding early action protocols, community groups, brigades, to go beyond the single hazard maybe they're focusing at the moment and considering those multi-hazard risks. And then in terms of policy, really having that securing government strategy, vision, and buy-in, which will help with the data sharing issues. And then also thinking about how we frame this. Is this maybe using temporal framing, or is it layered geographies to simplify how we kind of operationalize this? I think ultimately, though, this is quite a complex thing, and first we need to have a collective agreement on multi-hazard early warning system, particularly within the early warning system community, what it is, what it's not, whether we agree in terms of what it is or actually our gold standard ambition, or what we want to be working towards. I then think we need to develop kind of options for potential step-by-step processes in terms of how we get from where we are here until where we want to get to. And then we need to test that, try that, learn from Global North, and learn for examples in terms of what works and what doesn't work in the Global South context. I think ultimately, this is a very complex issue. Trying to figure out the boundaries and the practical kind of next steps for us as a community is difficult. But I feel like that there is a huge amount of momentum from within building on the Early Warnings for All initiative, and also the multi-hazard, multi-risk community is really strong. There's knowledge there, there's a community of practice. I feel that there's willingness that we can really build on, and ultimately I think in the next few years it's going to be really interesting in how we're making progress on this in the coming years around multi-hazard early warning systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana, for your insights and your point specifically on redundancy and adaptability is a timely reminder that resilience must be built into the very systems we rely on. Finally, Jeff, looking back at COVID-19, which readiness gap exposed during the pandemic remains most critical today? And what concrete steps should governments prioritize in the next 12 months to close that gap?
All right, 5 minutes, we got this. So, public health is the intersection of medical science, political science, and social science. The COVID-19 pandemic was a resounding success of operationalizing innovations in medical science, and it was a complete and utter failure of operationalizing globally the innovations in social science and political science. We had vaccines in record time, faster than anyone realized, highly effective, generally very, very safe, and in record time, we had them inequitably distributed. We had, because of the connection of the healthcare community, we had, even before there were vaccines or pharmaceutical interventions, we dramatically reduced loss of life in the healthcare setting for things like figuring out who really needs a ventilator versus other interventions and how to position people, simple steps, and better understanding sort of the epidemiology of the virus. And so it saved many, many lives for those who were fortunate enough to have access to healthcare. Social distancing helped sort of depress transmission rates in many different areas to buy time for interventions. If you were fortunate enough to be able to work remotely, to be able to put food on your table if you didn't show up to work in a crowded place, which you needed to be at every day in order to put food on your table. So this creates sort of an uncomfortable truth. The most frustrating thing for me is when people say, you know, we couldn't have seen COVID coming, we couldn't have anticipated this. We have photographs from 1918, photographic evidence from 1918 on the politics of pandemics and anti-masking leagues and the exploitation of politics for that. We have, in April of 2020, 40 authors in the prestigious journal Nature published an article on how the behavioral sciences could help inform. First of all, getting 40 researchers to come together to produce anything, much less quickly, is in itself a tremendous success, and laid out things like different community dynamics, collective community identity, and individualistic community, and how that may affect the way that they are able to implement these, how we internalize, how we process threats and things like that. All resounding, amazing information that was not translated into operations. And so as we look at the polycrisis, we're drawn, we're enamored by technical solutions, we're infatuated with these things, and they bring great success, don't get me wrong, in the things that lend themselves to that, but we shy away from these more complex and more uncomfortable things like politics, like social capital and social cohesion, which, by the way, is one of the strongest predictors of how communities do in a disaster, more than infrastructure investment, more than emergency management investments, social capital and social cohesion. In the United States and many parts of the world right now, I can predict your relative risk to COVID based on your political affiliation. It's a strong correlation now based on misinformation, based on the use of politics. So these are dynamics we really need to understand, because no amount of technical solutions in and of themselves are going to replace that. And so I would say as a call to action, the Sendai framework has done a lot of great things. It has brought sort of to the global forefront the development of systems and the development of expertise. But perhaps an unintended consequence has been sort of an elevation to such a high altitude that it's about the dissemination of information down to communities. And somewhere along the way, we've lost the elevation of the nuance and the expertise. We've created an expert class that has left out the expertise of the communities that we work with. And so in better understanding sort of where our expertise begins and ends, and in recognizing our community partners as true experts in the context that has to receive, deliver, and operationalize these innovations, it's time to think, how do we grow beyond Sendai? What does the next framework look like? How do we stand on the shoulders of what we've achieved, and also make up for what we may have inadvertently lost along the way?
Fantastic, thank you so much. That's a really interesting perspective. I'm sure there are many reactions. How are we feeling in the room? Good? Yeah, because now we're going to hear from you. So again, this is a fishbowl conversation setting. So you've heard the perspectives and insights from the inner circle. Now we're looking to gain as many perspectives as possible from the other circles. So we'll be taking one question from the room and one question online to make sure that everyone gets a chance. So you have the QR code on the screen. Please make sure to use that online. If you're asking a question or sharing your perspective with us in the room, kindly briefly state your name, position, and country, and keep it brief so you can make sure that we have as many perspectives as possible. Do we have handheld mics to give to our audience in the room, please? All right, who wants to start? Okay, I've got one question here, and then I'll be back to you, sir, right after a question online. Let's give her the mic. Yes, first row, thank you. No, I don't think so. You will be speaking English? Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for a very engaging discussion. I am Sahar Safai from Sage on Earth Consulting, a small consulting firm in Vancouver, Canada. We just finished a multi-hazard disaster and climate risk assessment in British Columbia, led by the two ministries of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness and Ministry of Environment. We took a systemic approach in designing a framework. There were 6 hazards considered, geohazards and climate hazards, and impacts on 6 value areas, as we call it: health, built environment, natural environment, society and culture, governance, and economy. All of this in the context of the legislation requirements, mandates of the ministries, but also the realities and the challenges on the ground. It was a huge challenge. We identified about 120 impacts on our society, basically. And the project also required equity and integration of indigenous knowledge. My point is, this is difficult work, as you know and as you pointed out. And I want to I don't want others to start from scratch. I think we need to use the experience, and many other countries have taken many steps, and the work that all of you on the panel have pointed out. We do need to help others who want to do this work and bring all this experience together. Despite the fact that there is a lot of the context of the location matters. So if we can have some reflections from the panelists, especially Ruth, you mentioned a symposium of bringing the players and actors with experience together. Do you see that as a vision, as an output of the work ahead?
Thank you very much. We'll be taking 3 questions and then have our speakers answer to them. Thank you. Do we have a question from our online audience? I kindly ask the team to push it on screen if we do so. Okay, yes, we do have one. So how do you feel the changing of government after elections affects the prioritization of polycrisis reduction? All right, we'll tackle that one too with our speakers. That's a second question. Let's take a final one in the room and then take the answers. Yes, please.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for that inspiring discussion. My name is Horst Tremers. I'm chair of the International Experts Group on Risk Information Management. So we have some colleagues that deal already with these things. Nevertheless, we have a lot of things that do not work. So we have a list of kind of desirables from information management point of view. If you look into other fields like geoinformation, Google Maps, for instance, works since several years, but it was a hard way to go there. So if we go in that direction, especially in multi-crisis aspects, and I'm very happy that Ruth discussed that a very interesting way. So there is a group that works there, but we don't have to go for data sharing, please. Data sharing is old school. We have to go for data interoperability, and that is a whole more difficult story to tell. And we're going for just in time, not for just what is available and we will use it. Information, if you don't negotiate for the information prior to any disasters, then you never will get that information on the spot. So all this is not done. For me, that says that I'm not looking only for 2030, end of Sendai framework. I'm looking for what has to be done. What is our opinion to do after 2030, the next program? Because the things that we are discussing here, we all know that that goes far beyond 2030 to realize. And we should collect to be prepared for the diplomatic service to put that in wording for the follow-up program.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insight. Interesting questions, insights from the room. Let's take a first response. Please feel free to jump in. We want this to be a dynamic conversation. Ruth, would you like to start?
Sure. I'll respond to the question here. So let me start from a bit of an oblique angle. At ASTRA, we have a set of principles that guide all of our work. The UN is no stranger to principles. They're incredibly important in terms of helping to set the destination for where we're going and to guide us there, if used well. So our 10 principles include a principle of uncertainty. What do we do when we don't know something or we can't know something? And that is the world in which we're living. That is the polycrisis, in part defined by what we don't know and what we can't know. What do you do under conditions of uncertainty? A key aspect of that is learning, of having quick feedback loops, of saying what's happening, how do we respond, how do we adapt, what do we know? Jeff, what you just said is music to my ears, because it's the first time, and this is not a word of a lie, this is the first time I've heard an analysis of our response to COVID. Now, why hasn't every country, every institution, every organization in the world tried to learn from what happened during COVID? It was a massive global pandemic. And yet, I've heard no analysis. My own country of Canada, any other country, any other institution. How are we going to navigate through the polycrisis if we're not learning? If we're not analyzing, if we're not doing sort of stock taking after the fact? Now, one way to do that, to get back to your question, is through networks, through bringing people together. So ASTRA is one network. It is systemic risk professionals with great diversity of geography, gender, age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We now have about 90 members. We've grown very quickly in a very short period of time. And that is one forum in which people can come together to learn. This is another forum. You know, UNDRR setting the stage for people to come together. There are many, many others. I think they're absolutely critical to the sort of collective glue that holds us together that will allow us to do this. Because let's be honest, we are humans at a point of time that is really difficult to navigate, and none of us know what we're doing. Honestly, we can talk about frameworks and methodologies and data and all that stuff. None of us know what we're doing. We don't know how to do this. And so the only way we're going to be able to get through this is to come together and to learn from each other. So.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Yes, Jeff.
I'd love to, tack onto that. And we're working with a group in New York City on kind of pandemic analysis, and I've been saying for a while that no one else is doing this, so thank you for validating my self-importance there. But it's true, and I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it speaks to the questions as well as the one from the online on electoral cycles and how that affects things. So in electoral cycles and in politics on why no one is doing this, it really speaks to my colleague and I, Ellen Carlin, we wrote this book during the pandemic, Catastrophic Incentives, Why Our Approaches to Disasters Keep Falling Short. And one of the things we look at is we look at the incentive structure of politics. And the incentive structure of politics is response-oriented. You are incentivized in an electoral context, you get reelected based on the perception of how well your response is. There's a very strong correlation. In the US, there's actually a dollar amount that buys you a vote for every X number of dollars you bring in. There is no correlation between preparedness and response. So we beat our heads together saying like why we need to educate the elected officials when really it's the voters that are creating that incentive or that disincentive for doing it. And then the other piece in terms of sort of the complexity in the case studies that I want to highlight is that, you know, the disaster space lacks a genome. I use that term very intentionally because I'm leading a project at Columbia called the Disaster Genome Project. But the idea is that, you know, we look at disasters. There are disaster centers all over academia. And if you're based in a medical school, you're looking at maybe emergency medicine and public health. If you're based in an engineering school, you're looking at the built environment. And like our genetic code, it influences. That in combination with our environment, in combination with a lot of other things, has a strong influence. It's not a precise predictor, but it tells you the kinds of things you need to do to be healthy, the kinds of information you need to approach this. I believe we have enough information now to start to lay out that genome, to start to triangulate sort of, I call it, all different sides of the Rubik's Cube. So if we're looking at one, we know how it changes the other things. And so I think also harnessing the collective information and the experience that everyone in this room and online and beyond has will also give us tremendous power where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Thank you very much. All right, you wanna, yes, jump in, please.
Yes, I wanted to address the question online. So how does affect every election a multi-crisis? Well, it's complex because each time a government enters, they have different targets and they have different goals. And that's related, among all, about egos and how they want to be remembered and what they want to left behind and say that they are better than others or something like that. So every time that happens, people gets affected. And every time that happens, we don't have a continuously leadership, or we don't have this correlation between systems. We tend to think that each government change means that we're getting something new, which it shouldn't be like that. We need to have a continuous project that, of course, they have different interests, but we need to have a continuous project that let people live the way they are supposed to. and have their assets well planted on the ground. So that's something that it really it's going to be helpful for.
Yeah, that's a strong point. Thank you. Having a long-term vision and all together working towards that vision and not starting over each time. All right, let's take 3 more questions and keep building on those. Yes, please. I'll come to you right now. I'll make sure to alternate between the online audience and get back to you right away. So, next question, what frameworks are most effective for identifying and mitigating systemic risks during times of compounded or cascading crisis? Okay, so that's the question from our online audience. Now we'll hear from you, sir. Can we give him a mic, please? Just here, first row, thank you.
So thank you very much. When we speak about risk, there's no one in the room, arguably. I can feel what you're saying because I came from the Philippines and we ranked first in the last 3 years, so Grand Slam. Well, my point that I would like to ask is, primarily let me give the context. Risk reduction, just like inclusivity, should not be an afterthought. It must be the foundation of risk-informed planning. In this brochure that was given to me a while ago, we have identified here 280 plus hazards already. Risks are evolving, and the risk landscape is becoming complex. What we realize in the Philippines is that, for instance, what happened during the pandemic, disasters would always come first time. So given this complex environment, we should foresee what should be the different risks that may come across. We might come across these 280 plus. So this is where futures thinking must come in. For instance, in the case of Japan, from 1940 to 1985, they foresee that there's a population boom, and their solution is flood control. Imagine that kind of futures thinking. Now, let me go to my point. We have also a publication in the World Risk Index which speaks about climate, catastrophe, and conflict nexus. So from your point of view, considering that people is at the heart of disaster risk reduction, meaning to say, in the context of social justice, those who have less in life must have more in disaster resilience building. Is there even a necessity of considering, right now, I cannot wait for 2030 post-Sendai, of having this climate, catastrophe, and conflict framework perhaps to address this polycrisis that we're talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that into the conversation. We'll take third, yeah, I can see another question from our online audience. So what single cross-sector partnership put in place over the next 2 years would most rapidly turn systemic risk insight into coordinated action? All right, let's tackle these 3 with our speakers, and then we'll take more from the room. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I think I might tackle the single cross-sector partnership and from a very selfish perspective from the early warning system community. I think we're kind of at the cusp here, and it would be really great to bring together the multi-hazard research and disaster risk reduction community who are focusing on multi-hazard risk assessments and using those tools with the early warning system and the anticipatory action community. I think we've got enough momentum between both of those different communities that if we came together, we could start trying things, implementing things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and learning from that, and really implementing actions on the ground with and for the communities. So I think if we could do that in the next 2 years, we would learn a huge amount that could potentially have implications for other sectors in the DRR community and wider. So I think, yeah, for me, and there might be others who might disagree, but for me that would be a really easy win, low-hanging fruit for us to make huge progress in the next 2 years.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
طبعا حاب
Yeah, can you please put your headsets on? Thank
sorry
you.
for that again, sorry. Okay. حبيت أجاوب على السؤال
I
الأخ
would like to answer the question to the colleague from the Philippines. Like he said, there are many risks, more than 200. Even some countries have more than 400 risks. Some risks have been detected before due to climate change. Most countries were not prepared for climate change, although we spoke about climate change in many other countries, like in Paris, in the UAE. But now, if we want to measure the risk based on the possibility of happening, we can evaluate the risk and we can say A, B, C, what are the highest risks that we can face so that we can be fully prepared at 100%. Some risks that can be in the long term, like the pandemic. The pandemic was not much known, but due to the intervention of human being in developing some viruses, that's why some risks emerged for pandemic. So the country should be prepared in predicting risk. Systems of early warning should be available for all countries. If there is a risk in the US, it would impact us directly. If there is a risk in China, it can impact the USA and vice versa. And it happens instantly. That's why systems of early warning should be robust, and we should have analysis, whether through AI or by experts who would be able to detect the risks, and we should be ready for any short-term risk.
Identifying those risks, classifying them, assessing afterwards is really key. Yes, please.
But if I can, what I'd like to do is speak in defence of Sendai. And what I do here regularly, and it is regularly the question posed to us, is what's next in 2030? But can I just reflect, even before Sendai, there was Hyogo. Then 10 years ago, we sat down and we identified the goalposts that were going to take us forward for the next decade. And I think they're as relevant now as they were 10 years ago. And I think they're important guideposts for what we should be considering in 2030. It's about understanding that risk. And if we look at the conversations that were going on a decade ago, we were talking about individual risks. Here we are today talking about polycrisis. So we are evolving, the conversation is evolving, the technical capacities and the investments are evolving. That second objective of Sendai, who do we have around the table? Those governance mechanisms. And importantly, once upon a time it used to be just the emergency managers, government organisations. Here we have youth, we have Indigenous, First Nations, those people, academic sectors, those people. So once again, there's a strong case that we are evolving. The big challenge is, are we doing it quickly enough? And it is about choice. And Jeff, you raised a great point there. Have we chosen to learn the lessons of COVID? And it is a mistake if we don't. But certainly, I see globally and also nationally and internationally, people have learnt those lessons and we are evolving. We are investing more in risk reduction. It is targeted. Is it the right targets? Have we got the prioritisation right? Are we doing enough? And I think people can answer those questions in their own communities and in their own countries. And then finally, that last piece is that we continue to learn the lessons after the most recent event, which goes to your point, Jeff. And the challenge here for all of us is, no, we're not going to wait till 2030, are we? Is that we need to continue to evolve. And the whole theme of this conference is, we need to act now and we need to accelerate that. So I think we're in reasonable shape in terms of those frameworks and those guideposts and the signals we're getting. It's what we choose to do with them in our own sector, in our own communities, with our own governments, irrespective of the electoral cycle.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add 2 points. And ask me offline why we didn't do a national after-action review in the U.S. But more generally, the political incentive is not to get stuck in the mud. It's to move on to what's next, right? And so that can be counterproductive towards this point of learning from it. But the question on which single cross-sector partnership, at first I was going to reject the premise of the question and say there's no single cross-sector partnership, but actually there is one, and it's children. We've done a lot of work through our Resilient Children and Resilient Communities initiative. And the fact is that children are connected with every other facet of society. And everyone is interested in the betterment of children and the betterment of their future. By focusing on children, by focusing on the needs of children and the resilience of children, it's a backdoor into a whole of society approach. We held a congressional briefing with members of both political parties during the Donald Trump administration. with sitting members showing up from both sides, agreeing on things. It was phenomenal, it was amazing, and it's because it was community driven and it was focused on children, and this was one topic that we can continue to get consensus on throughout. So it's an important sort of backdoor into whole of society. It's also an investment in our future, and not losing people along the way. And the question in terms of some of the frameworks, as well as like how do we look 30 years out, where we've drawn a lot of help in the disaster science has been in the private sector with managing uncertainty. A great book that has nothing to do with this that we've drawn a lot of lessons from is called The Strategy Paradox. Definitely check it out after you know, get mine, of course. And then and another is in the military, especially for responding under uncertain events. There are a lot of tactical tools and resources that are designed around, rather than trying to predict with precision, frame our uncertainty, create options within that uncertainty that we can then exercise as things unfold.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have enough time for a final round of questions. Yes, please, let's take 2 in the room and one final one online. Okay, I see one here, then one back here, and then I'll be back right here again.
Thank you. My name is Jared Brown, and I lead an organization that does advocacy work on global catastrophic risk called Global Shield. And we're at a UN conference, and we've had very little discussion about the UN. And in the fall, the General Assembly adopted the Pact for the Future. And in that pact, there was an Action 54 on complex global shocks. And it spoke to the need of the UN to reimagine the way it approaches complex global shocks. And so I'm curious to hear from you all about what recommendations you would have for the UN about changing its future response to events like COVID-19.
Thank you. I want to make sure that I keep alternating online, and then I'll be back to you right now. Let's see if there is another question. So systemic risk comes from the systems themselves. How do we overcome this? How can we address risks that stem from the very systems in which we operate? All right, let's hear from you now.
Thank you very much. My name is Molly Gilmore, and I'm a medical sociologist at Cardiff University in Wales. So my question is just regarding that, given, of course, the multiple crises require multiple ways of understanding to create the solutions needed. So I'm just thinking about the almost consistent kind of political or financial systems focused to think about kind of the face of disaster preparedness and recovery. But there's been a call in a lot of the work that I've been doing with affected populations, particularly within the healthcare sector, to think more about the moral economy of care as a way to capture the more than economic losses within disaster response. So I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how or if these kind of more than economic or more than political and focusing really on the personal frameworks are considered in your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I promise to be back to you. Very brief, final question. I want to make sure that we save enough time for final remarks. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Haley Wilson. I am a student at UCL, and I wanted to say that I appreciate hearing a brief analysis on the pandemic, as it was the first major polycrisis that I lived through, as I was 13 when the pandemic started. And this pandemic was a crash course for the youth in seeing how governments and bodies react to polycrises. We saw how it was handled, and it did not particularly consistently give confidence in the youth in the current bodies that are responding to crises. So I was wondering, what advice would you give to ensure, to ensure how to bridge this gap in confidence between these intergenerational people, and to just bridge the gap between the youth and the people who are currently and actively making change?
And I think this is a wonderful way to end up the discussion. I'd love to hear your perspective on these questions and also your final thought as we wrap up. Ruth.
Sure, thank you. Let me just really briefly touch on most of them. In terms of the economy of care, I just want to acknowledge the question because I think it's really important. And one of our principles at ASTRA is actually care and compassion. And I would like to just put a shout out there that we need to extend that care to our non-human species on this planet and ecosystems themselves. It gets very little talk as well in terms of what we actually care about. In terms of the UN, we could talk for hours about that. I think at the very least, we've got to figure out how to break down the silos within the UN if we're talking about systemic risk. The fact that we have declarations and conventions on every individual thing, really needs to be addressed, and we need to find ways to talk across all these interconnected challenges, because we know they all are connected. And very briefly on the systemic risk coming from systems themselves, I could talk about systems forever, love talking about systems. We are all part of the system. We are not separate from the system. The risks are not separate from us. Many of them are natural, but many of them we created by the systems that we built. And we can undo those systems, our political systems, our economic systems, and we can rebuild them. So the power is in our hands to create change in systems. How do we overcome this? There's a lot of systems thinking about how to change a system. The number one thing is you have to change the goal of the system. What is the goal of the system? I used to work on food systems. What's the goal of the food system? It's to deliver cheap food really quickly. Is that the goal we want? And if we start thinking about the goal instead being resilience, for instance, we wouldn't build a food system that is subject to, the disruptions of war, that is based on 3 crops, is subject to very fragile water and energy systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see where I'm going. What's the goal of the system? And then you can start to figure out how you navigate towards changing the system itself to line up with those goals. So just a few thoughts on some of those questions.
Thank you very much. Catherine?
Thank you. So, well, it's a lot, but how we can avoid the systemic risk through localization? When it happens that we need to understand where are we based in, what are the logics behind those communities, and then overcome this. An example, in Mexico, we have a very huge problem on gentrification. It's a lot. Urban developers are taking the real and are displacing people from, there is no land for them to build their houses, to live in. They are buying their houses to build developments and then leave them with nothing. So it is a huge problem. And that, I'm sure it happens in a lot of countries, but in Mexico it's pretty serious. So if we locate that risk, we can overcome it one at a time. Like, okay, this is displacing people, and it's people making, they are living on the streets, they are losing their jobs, they can't afford rent, not even buying a house. So it comes through localization. Understand your problem before you jump in on others' problems, and focus on your country's problems. And then you will overcome with this infrastructure that it seems to be temporary, but at the end of the day, it will help you more than worrying about targeting the next goal that the international agenda gets you. You have to first tackle the problems that your community has, that your people has, that people that voted for you has. And then you can start thinking about arranging things globally. First, you have to take people-centered approaches. So that's one thing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Please go ahead, yes.
So I think, we do need to start with person-based frameworks. We need to start with what people need, what they know, and what their capacities are. And then from that, what can the multi-hazard, multi-risk science and technology do to support that? Youth and youth engagement is a critical part of that conversation, and they're key agents within the system to achieve change. So by engaging them, we need to raise awareness in terms of what is possible and what is not possible in terms of the realities that we face, build their trust, and then empower them to help us to achieve change at scale.
Thank you very much. Kindly put your headsets back for final thoughts from Brigadier Bourguiba.
أنا طبعاً حاب أختم ضرورة الاهتمام بأنظمة إنذار مبكر من أجل رصد المخاطر والتهديدات المتوقعة وإجراء كثير من السيناريوهات المعقدة والمركبة وإجراء المزيد من التمرينات الميدانية وليس تمرينات طاولة من أجل معرفة أن النظام اللي جميع أنظمة الحكومة شغالة والقطاع الخاص والعام شغالة تحت تناغم واحد تحت مظلة واحدة وأنه يكون في سيناريوهات مركبة يحاكي جميع الخدمات قطاع الطاقة والاتصال والرعاية الصحية تعامل بشكل متناغم على أساس أن نكون مستعدين نضمن الجاهزية والاستعداد وكذلك الاهتمام في مرحلة التعافي جدا مهمة.
That's a very important point. Jeff, let's take your final insights and then we'll wrap up the session with you, Brendan.
Sure. I'm trying to decide between two very problematic quotes, and I think I'm going to go with the first. There was a quote from U.S. Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld, very terrible in the context, but out of context, I think it echoes in my mind. And that's, you don't go to war with the army you want, you go to war with the army you have. And I say this to say that we have a lot of aspirations for what these different systems can be and what they should be, but there's a reality in how they're constructed. There are sovereignty handoffs to the UN that restrict how far it can go with certain things. There are returns on investment which are inescapable in leveraging the private sector. That being said, I think the math is very myopic, that there are values that we can connect the health impacts, the indirect cost, the persistent sort of economic drag of a bad recovery of inequities, that we're getting better at finding the math with to help make that case, to help make that self-interest case. It doesn't get us everywhere we want to go. It gets us further in the short term and in the medium term, but in the long term, we do need to keep our pointed in the direction that our moral compass points us in to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Brendan, we're wrapping up this session with you.
I came wanting to speak about the importance of governance, and we've heard today that we get the best outcomes when we really understand the impacts at a local level and those communities. But then the question that rises in my mind when we're talking about systemic risk and polycrisis, what are the arrangements and who are sitting around the tables, and what's the environment in which people are operating and providing confidence to those communities when their ability to manage the consequences of that crisis are completely exhausted. And that's really the role for all of us. And we have challenges, and we're going to have choices into the future about how we manage that risk. And I think importantly, it still comes back and rests on who's sitting around the table, what are we prioritising, what's each individual sector view of the consequences in their sector, and then what are the steps that all of us are required to take to minimise the harm that's causing, not only in their sector, but in related sectors as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. This was really a very interesting and lively conversation. For the sake of time, let me quickly summarize some of the few points. So first, we need to go beyond simply responding to immediate impacts and dig deeper to uncover the underlying vulnerabilities that allow these shocks to spread. I think we've touched on that quite a bit. And these vulnerabilities often hide in our social systems, our cities, and even in the ways we make decisions. So addressing them is how we move from short-term fixes to long-term resilience. Second, we've seen the power of partnerships, collaboration, and the wisdom that already exists within communities. I think that was a strong point also. And third, we heard how inclusive and transparent approaches where everyone has a seat at the table, the youth also are essential for making that critical shift from simply reacting to risks to actually anticipating and preventing them. So these takeaways remind us that resilience is not a one-off project, it's a continuous mission that requires courage, collaboration, and the humility also to learn from every voice around us. So kindly join me in giving a round of applause to your speakers and to yourselves also. And again, if you feel like sharing any insights on social media, please do so using the hashtags. Thank you very much again for your attention. Have a great day.